If I get tired of holding this mic, I will be just clipping it to something random. Now that Love Island Season 7 is over, we need to talk. I know I'm not the only one who's been logging onto social media after every single episode and feeling batshit crazy because of the takes that we've been seeing, especially with the people that are literally bending over backwards to defend Huda. Like, how are we still doing this? How is it that after everything that has aired, we still have people going to bat for her? Still have people acting like she is the victim in every situation? Why is it that some people can clearly see the manipulation and the gaslighting and the repeated patterns, and others are still eating out of her hand? Why are people still so convinced that Huda has no issues and that everyone is just ganging up on her? We're going to unpack all of this in today's video because the lack of critical thinking and the refusal to name harm when it's coming from a woman is honestly disturbing. But before we dive in, I want to make this very clear. This video is not intended to encourage bullying, harassment, or dogpiling of anyone discussed, including Huda. I am not a licensed professional and I am not here to diagnose anyone, so any attempts to do that in the comments will be deleted. Let's keep this space mature and respectful. Everything being discussed in this video is solely based on what we see on screen and in some cases what Islanders have come out to say. We see a very curated version of these people's lives, and editing can absolutely shape perception. I haven't forgotten that. So I'm analyzing what was presented to us, nothing more, nothing less. At the end of the day, we're all human, and people are allowed to grow and change and evolve, and I genuinely hope that space is available for everyone. But giving grace does not mean defending behavior that is clearly harmful. There should be a healthy balance. We can hold people accountable and believe in their ability to grow. Lastly, if anything in this video feels triggering or uncomfortable, I encourage you to disengage. Your peace matters more than a YouTube video. So obviously, if you're watching this video, it means that you've either seen through the nonsense and needed a space to not feel crazy, or it was sent to you. And if that's the case, hi, how are ya? I'm Shay. A little bit about me is that I'm a person who loves to analyze media and characters and the reasons behind why humans do what humans do. So, if you're the kind of person who likes to end arguments and debates by saying it's not that deep, this video is probably not going to land well for you. But hey, if you're willing to listen, I'm willing to chat. And when it comes to Huda, there is a lot to chat about. So let's just start from the beginning, shall we? And I do have my handy dandy laptop in front of me because, baby, I'm serious about this, okay? So, on first impressions, and honestly, as a baseline, Hood is a pretty charismatic and likable person. She's bubbly and she's confident and she's very outgoing. And we see that immediately when she steps onto the scene after Olandria and Shelly get settled in. She kind of comes across as a bit like whimsical, in my opinion. Like, she definitely seems like a hopeless romantic, that is very clear. I remember in the first few episodes, I was really rooting for her, even though she displayed like a couple of red flags in my head. At the time, I think I kind of just blamed the behavior on like nerves and giddiness and the curse of falling too fast, too soon. Some things that did stick out to me with her, though, was how she immediately jumped into being overly affectionate with the ladies. And it puzzled me a bit because, like, girl, this is Love Island. These women could very well end up being your competitors when it comes to love. Maybe don't throw out those I love yous and sisters too soon, girl. But around the episode of the baseball challenge, I realized that doing that was kind of Huda's way of ensuring she does stay in the competition, and I'll explain that in a little bit. You see, Hood is really good at making people feel comfortable, and that's usually a strength in relationships, both platonic and romantic. But in Huda's case, it's kind of like her secret weapon. She mirrors people in both their dialogue and demeanor, and she uses a sort of performative empathy to align herself with the ladies in the house, as to almost come across as non threatening as possible. giving them a sense of security and loyalty far before they've ever proven to earn it. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad trait, nor am I holding it against her. Huda's talked about her fear of abandonment before and how she doesn't have many female friends, or at least close ones. So it makes sense in a way that she's eager to befriend all of these ladies. But with that line of thinking, I can't help but think about the why behind it. Why don't you have close female friends? What conflicts have occurred that have made you or them abandon the friendship? These are the questions I often find myself asking when Huda's on screen displaying these behaviors. One of the first signs I saw within Huda that sparked that like performative pipeline in my head was during the recoupling episode where most of the guys stood up for Sierra. And Huda told the girls that they deserved some real men, implying that because the guys stood and Jeremiah didn't, that Jeremiah was more real or secure or better than the men that these other ladies chose to couple up with. I remember how much heat Olandria got for simply telling Oda to chill and feeling insane when reading all of the criticism because in reality, it wasn't necessary. Huda was being inconsiderate and not thoughtful, despite the fact that she definitely thought she was being thoughtful. She was performing empathy towards the ladies, and it backfired. And the reason I say it was performance and not genuine empathy is because real empathy wouldn't have been overshadowed by her need to praise Jeremiah. She couldn't even get the words out to warn the other girls without first hyping him up, so it kind of just came across as like this weird ego contest. Later that night, in the next episode, we see a complete breakdown from Meta where she goes and vents to Shelley and kind of paints Olandria in a bad light, saying that she'd never correct her in public like that, as if that was such a betrayal. Now, this was puzzling to me as well, how such an insignificant moment could be blown out of proportion just that quickly in Huda's head. Something that should have been mildly embarrassing, if even that much, was humiliating to Huda. So much so that she needed full reassurance and an apology from Olandria after the moment was said and done. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, in my personal life, I don't tolerate friends like that. I'm real strict. Any behavior where I basically have to emotionally regulate you um, is just a no no for me, especially if it's because of something that they did. I've done it before in the past and it is exhausting. Like, even if we are best friends, that is a red flag for me. And Olandria and Jelly are not Huda's best friends. By this point in the storyline, they'd known her less than a week, and they still handled the situation with a lot of grace, so I give them credit. But the reason I bring this up is because as I talk about Huda in this video, you'll notice some patterns. One, Huda will be at the center of conflict, big or small, doesn't matter. Then, two, immediately after, Huda will victimize herself or convey that she's confused, surprised, and shocked at what the conflict is, even if she was already told what the issue was. And then three, she'll apologize and be reassured and appeased for her emotional breakdown, but then inevitably will repeat the cycle. This is the Huda way. It's the entire reason why I'm making this video, because patterns that don't help or heal us stunt us. And sometimes being called out for the very thing that you keep doing wrong helps you to finally do it better the next time around. And this also brings me to the point about Jeremiah and what happened with him because it ties directly into this pattern. Huda's girls sisterhood persona started to crack during the baseball challenge when the two bombshells arrived and both chose Jeremiah to join them on a base. She was moody and passive aggressive and downright cold toward the new girls, especially Amaya, and this, understandably, made a lot of the audience side eye her. For someone who presented as such a welcoming and bubbly character, she'd done a full 180 at the mere possibility that her man would be taken. While none of the other ladies got defensive or angry that their men were also picked for the bases, Lydia would say things like the bombshells should know their place, that they should respect what her and Jeremiah have, and proceeded to disrespect their character and call them out their names. And as I was watching it, I was just like, you're not very girl's girl when you feel threatened, huh, Huda? Now, jealousy is normal before anybody comes at me sideways, and this is not me saying that the Islanders need to be stoic robots who never feel. As cool as someone tries to be, you're bound to get attached to someone that you're with 24/7. That's human. But it's the way that we act on our emotions that tells us whether our behaviors are healthy or toxic. And this is where the Huda defenders get it wrong. They confuse having justifiable feelings with then justifying harmful behavior. Being upset is valid, but when someone allows their emotions to make them act in a way that's volatile or harmful to those around them, i.e., belittling other women, we call that an emotionally reactive and unregulated person. And we really see this come out while Huda is partnered with Jeremiah, someone she clearly perceived to be the most desirable man in the villa. She safeguarded him like he was a limited resource, and while he was also territorial over her, Huda took it to the next level. And this happened multiple times, one of the most prominent being when she left hickeys on his neck that he did not want. Huda also leaned heavily into her connections with the other girls and sort of subtly encouraged this group mentality that Jeremiah was her person and therefore untouchable. And anyone who tested or questioned their bond was shut down and excluded and then named a mean girl. She did this to both Maya and Iris, two bombshells who came to the villa at different times but both had intentions to get to know Jeremiah. With both women, she attempted to sow seeds of disdain for them within the other girls, saying things like they didn't have good intentions and they're not girls. There was all of this moral posturing that was created by her simply feeling insecure in her connection with Jeremiah. And in turn, it created this sort of like ripple effect amongst the other women, where they felt like they needed to put the other ladies first before their own needs and priorities. All of this in order to remain loyal to not just Huda, but to each other. But if we're being honest, there is no such thing as girl's girl when you're in a reality TV show competing for love. And we see both Amaya and Olandria struggle with this later on in the season, with Amaya refusing to create a connection with Charlie out of loyalty to Hannah, who'd come in with her, and with Olandria feeling as though she couldn't explore her connection with Nick because of her faux friendship with Sierra, despite her actually knowing Nick longer than she knew Sierra. It's effects like this that are indicative of the damage Huda's behavior can cause. What started as a seemingly harmless attempt to build friendships became a prison of optics, of external perception, and a lack of pursuing your own desires, not based on genuine loyalty, but on guilt tripping. And while that's not unheard of in the villa, what made it uncomfortable was how Huda dressed it up as integrity and connection when it was really about control. Because in the future, when that same integrity was expected to be returned, she forgot it ever existed. And that's when I realized Huda wasn't playing the game, she was playing people. And a large chunk of the audience were a part of the people who got played. And most of it has to do with an inability to be honest if it means being wrong. Most people who now currently defend Huda simply aren't willing to renege on that initial perception of her. They've married themselves to a version of her that she keeps proving does not exist, and they refuse to acknowledge that because it would mean that they were wrong and the haters were right. But here's the thing, Huda knows how she's being perceived. If there's one thing that girl knows how to do, it's observe. She observes every change in tone, demeanor, and energy within a person she's talking to. She catches literally every micro expression, which is why she's able to consistently clock when someone feels a way about her. But y'all still act like that girl don't know when she's doing something wrong. Huda likes to lean into that sweet, slightly clumsy, overly apologetic persona when it serves her. And this is where the weaponized incompetence starts to show. For those that don't know, weaponizing incompetence is like pretending you don't know how to do something, or acting confused, overwhelmed, or incapable so that other people will step up, lower their expectations, or let you off the hook entirely. It's a way to dodge accountability while still benefiting from the situation. And in Huda's case, it shows up a lot when she's responding to conflict. You'll often see her pulling a woe is me angle or an I didn't mean to be the bad guy, despite her continuously repeating the patterns of her harmful behavior. But this wasn't always her approach. When Huda wasn't being monitored by the other islanders, she was actually quite competent and very willing to use tactics like gaslighting, intimacy, and manipulation to get her way. She would mostly use these on Jeremiah, whether it was to keep him locked into their fleeting connection or keep others from pursuing him by staking her claim. For example, ever noticed how every time a conversation wasn't going Huda's way, she would initiate intimacy? Or how she'd be confronted for things and it was so easy for her to immediately tell little white lies? Like when Jeremiah confronted her about the hickey and she immediately said she didn't do it, or when Ace confronted her during the challenge and she said that she would rather kiss him than kiss Amaya, but then to Amaya she said she'd rather pie Ace than pie her. So it's clear this didn't just happen with Jeremiah, it happened with everybody. When it came to her and Jeremiah's water park date, she made sure to amp up Jeremiah's words when relaying what happened as to distort how the girls perceived their connection. And it's also not lost on me how, when she told these lies about Jeremiah wanting to live together, it was in front of the bombshells. That was her way of asserting dominance, if you will. There's also a reason why all of the ladies validated Huda in the strength of her connection, while a scene later, we as the audience would be shown the reality of their relationship. It was a form of gaslighting. Huda was altering the perception of their realities by feeding them false information. And then you have the manipulation. When it came to Pancake Gate, where Jeremiah made her half cooked pancakes, and instead of communicating this issue straight up, Huda got Taylor to cook for her and then boasted about this to Jeremiah. She kept poking and prodding for a reaction from him, even telling him that he needed to finish all of his food because he's a man. And when he got reasonably frustrated and annoyed by her persistent comments, she turned the situation on him and made him seem like the bad guy for not responding to an issue that she never presented up front. Literally, go back and watch it. She literally expected him to read her mind based on those cues and then stormed off when he didn't. And to add on top of that, could have made it seem like Taylor made her pancakes just out of the goodness of his heart, when in reality she had to ask Taylor too to make her breakfast. I want you to notice how Huda always expects everything to be just handed or given to her without the necessary communication. Notice how she lacks grace for those around her when they commit a perceived wrong. So far, this has happened to Olandria, Amaya, and Jeremiah. And this isn't even the worst of her relationship with Jeremiah. Fast forward a few episodes, and Huda and Jeremiah have been forcibly split up by America, who believe the relationship has become too toxic and exhausting to watch. The scene is dramatic and devastating on all fronts, and I would just like to say that I did not vote for that. I did not vote for that. I personally voted for Nick and Iris, I think. So, but it's Huda's reaction after the split that becomes most concerning to me and is the primary reason I would warn others against someone with her behaviors. The night of the split, Jeremiah shuts down, and I'm not saying that was particularly good or smart of him to do. Frankly, my thoughts on Jeremiah are that he bores me and that he too displayed a lot of toxic patterns and behaviors with Huda. But you may be wondering why this video is about her then instead of him. And to answer that is, while I don't consider Jeremiah a victim, Huda still displayed multiple abusive behaviors and, unlike Jeremiah, could not apologize or take accountability for any of them. She did not once give him a genuine apology for the way she treated him for multiple days for a decision that he did not make that split them up. She did, however, repeatedly blame him for the way she was taking her anger out on him and said it was his fault that she was acting that way. And look, I don't care how badly you think somebody has wronged you, it is always your responsibility and yours alone to manage your actions. Going back to what I said before, any person who needs somebody outside of themselves to regulate them is a person that will drain your energy. And Huda repeatedly contradicted herself during this next stretch of episodes as well. She'd tell Jeremiah to leave her alone and that she wanted nothing to do with him, but then turn around and test his loyalty to her by expecting him to sleep outside instead of in the bed with his assigned couple. She dragged his name through the mud repeatedly, even claiming he only wanted to use Iris to win. Mind you, this is all because he was pulling away from his connection with Huda. And she didn't like that, so she punished him for it and made herself seem like the victim. This manipulation worked on the women in the villa too. Despite Huda's exhausting behavior over the last couple of days, they sided with her time and time again, appeasing her for things that she'd already ranted a million times about. And the times that they did attempt to hold her accountable, like when they asked her what it would take for her to truly leave Jeremiah alone, she would shut them down completely, displaying a lack of wanting to do better or be better, if not for herself, then for those around her. The consideration was completely out the window, and it wasn't just with the girls, it was with the boys too. She woke Taylor out of his sleep because she realized Jeremiah was on a date. Considering the Islanders don't get enough rest as it is, this just adds insult to injury. For her to feel so entitled to interrupt someone else's rest when she could have just waited. But because Huda was experiencing this intense situation, now everyone in the villa needs to tend to her intense emotions, no matter the circumstance. There was no regard or consideration shown for her fellow islanders who didn't ask to be her on site therapist. When the new bombshells came back from their dates and the group separated to go talk amongst themselves, Huda made it her mission to seem as disinterested as possible. She didn't care that her self proclaimed good friend Olandria had also come back from an incredible date. No, she only cared that Jeremiah had been a part of the group that went and wanted everyone to feel uncomfortable until someone asked her what was wrong. I think this was her attempt to re-establish control when she felt it had been ripped from her, but trying to make other people miserable simply because you are is not a way to live. And it's not the way you treat people you call friends. When Huda finally sucked it up and went to hear the stories about the dates, she quickly went back into a state of anger and made it about herself, calling Jeremiah and Iris's date her dream date, and then saying he knew that as if he had any say in what the date was going to be. That was funny to me. But it started to get really ridiculous when she then went to go spy on the guys to hear what Jeremiah was saying, and when he revealed something to them that she didn't like, she began to go off on him, calling him all kinds of names and claiming he's a liar before approaching Iris for information and eventually breaking down with her too. To be honest, I can't imagine what it was like to be in Iris's shoes, to be forced into the situation between a dysfunctional couple and then one half of that couple is talking about you behind your back while also looking to you for comfort. But that's just a day in the life of being around the emotional roller coaster that Huda is. And I feel like a lot of Huda defenders tend to only look at things from the perspective of Huda without also doing the work to empathize with those she's pulling into her chaos. I'm gonna ask you this. If someone you didn't know was suddenly being incredibly emotionally intense with you, and you were now tasked with appeasing them, would you not feel uncomfortable, confused, or dumped on? Would you want it to continue happening, or would you hope that they learned some goddamn self control and left you out of it? Not to mention, if it was proven that this person that's dumping on you was also talking about you behind your back and only stopped doing so when you complied with their weird boundaries and rules. Would you not feel imprisoned? Because I sure would. Like, this isn't just about a one on one interaction anymore, and these aren't isolated events. After the vote with America, Huda's behavior created an emotional climate in the villa where everyone felt like they had to tiptoe around her reactions. People started anticipating her moods, adjusting their choices, and putting their own comfort and clarity on hold just to keep the peace. That's not friendship. That's not connection. That's emotional domination. And whether she meant to or not, Huda made herself the center of the villa's emotional ecosystem. And once that happened, even the people who saw through it just started playing along because it's easier to enable her than it is to confront the constant drama. Olandria started doing it hella early. When Huda cried to Shelley over Olandria checking her, she realized that this girl cannot take criticism and began to just allow Huda's delusions to continue because it was easier than correcting them. Then you have Amaya, who, in my opinion, is Huda's biggest emotional punching bag because she just dumps everything onto her all the time. And Amaya didn't even realize Huda was talking shit about her. That's the crazy thing. She literally confirmed this in a recent interview with Alex Cooper. Like, even the men that Huda later pursued post Jeremiah had to pretend like her emotional instability wasn't the reason they weren't interested in getting to know her. Pepe and TJ being prime examples of that. Pepe was kind of low key disgusted that Huda tried to shoot her shot at him, and he went right on back to Hannah to snitch because Lord knows Huda was not going to tell her. And all of this lack of accountability unfortunately just worsened the situation for both fans of the show and the people in the villa. Those that defended Huda started running with the narrative that she changed because nobody was actively negating her behavior, and in the rare case that they did, the fans would commit to a witch hunt against the person even if Huda was objectively in the wrong. A great example of this occurred during the infamous heart rate challenge. Shelley and Olandria were dogpiled by viewers for calling Huda out, and to this day, they're still being dragged across social media and news articles. All because Huda threw a rock and hit her hand. It's that simple. During the heart rate challenge, she gave a very intimate dance to Ace, and it was so long that the production team edited most of it out, according to other Islanders. And all of this happened because Huda was mad that Shelley and Chris were still exploring their connection. Huda literally admitted this in a podcast interview, like yesterday. She told Alex Cooper that she felt frustrated that Chris wasn't giving her the attention she wanted, so she chose Ace during the challenge, who was coupled up with Shelley to dance on, basically as a passive aggressive move. And to be honest, anyone who can read between the lines clocked that immediately. This was not a surprise. Like, we all saw the episode. But getting confirmation that that's what it was all along when people were justifying it was nice, yeah. And of course, Shelley had an issue with it, and she had every right to, because let's not forget, Huda had previously told both Shelley and Chris that she was bringing him back into the villa so they could both keep exploring. But as soon as she saw that Chris was still prioritizing Shelley, it was like a switch flipped. Her jealousy got the best of her, and that girl's girl mask started to crack. Suddenly, it wasn't about them both exploring, it was about control. Huda thought that by choosing Chris, he was supposed to drop Shelley as his first priority, even though he told Huda that she was still his first priority. But because he didn't, it's like Huda couldn't handle being outdone by Shelley. And like clockwork, she weaponized her tears again. She played dumb, saying it was just a challenge, which, girl, no. If it was just a challenge, why did you admit in your own interview that you were feeling a type of way about Chris? Why did you choose Ace out of everyone in that villa if it was just a challenge? You could have chosen anyone to prove that point to Chris, but you chose Ace because you were also proving a point to Shelley. It's a classic Huda contradiction. She makes these emotionally loaded choices, then backpedals like they were totally innocent. But even after that, Shelley didn't lose her cool on Huda. She told Huda that she needed space and that she wasn't ready to talk. Completely fair. But the next day, Huda turned it into a whole sob story for Chris. She specifically asked him, would it have been better if I was ugly? Like, what? What does that even mean? It's not about looks, it's about loyalty. Shelley's whole point was that Huda would spiral anytime another woman dared breathe in Jeremiah's direction. But she thought it was fine to give a targeted and long lap dance to Shelley's man? It's hypocritical. She holds every other girl to a different standard than she holds herself. She demands solidarity, but she doesn't extend it. And Huda even asking that question revealed so much. Like, in that moment, she wasn't attempting to truly understand where Shelley was coming from. All Huda cared about was the perception of how she ranks. Because to even think that Shelley's issue was rooted in Huda's looks rather than her disloyalty means Huda was never approaching the situation as a friend. She was approaching it as a competitor. She was thinking in terms of beauty and desirability and attention rather than values, rather than respect. To me, her feelings on the situation is how dare you be mad that I won? But the problem is, Shelley didn't even know there was something to be won. This whole ego war Huda was waging was one sided, imaginary, and deeply, obviously personal. While Shelley thought she was navigating a friendship, Huda was trying to dominate one. And because literacy is apparently dead, Huda's fans twisted the entire thing. Shelley was suddenly a mean girl who was jealous of Huda when it was actually quite the opposite. This all came to a head during the Stand on Business challenge, where Islanders wrote anonymous letters to people they wanted to confront. Shelley wrote a letter to Huda and vice versa, but Shelley's was respectful, clear, and honest. And somehow Huda managed to make herself the victim again. She said that she felt bullied, and when she was in a group with the girls, she purposely isolated herself to be seen as like an outsider. And since the fandom loves a crying girl over an articulate one, that was all it took. The hate train picked up speed and hasn't stopped since. And from there, we ended up getting the fan rankings, where for the first time this season, the Islanders would get a glimpse into how America was truly perceiving them. Huda, despite everything, landed in the top five, I'm pretty sure, pretty much every time. But Shelley was consistently near the bottom, which was so lame because it wasn't even indicative of how America actually felt, just indicative of how hardcore Huda's fan base was. But unfortunately, the message was clear. The public favored Huda over Shelley, and once the Islanders clocked that, everything shifted. It didn't matter if somebody made valid points or communicated them clearly. If those points were made in contrast to Huda's, they would be framed as the bully, as jealous, or as fake. Meanwhile, Huda's pattern of emotional chaos was repackaged as vulnerability and genuineness. And from there, Huda would be validated at every turn. The tears worked, the performative isolation worked, the victim narrative worked. People that ended up leaving the villa pretended like Huda wasn't a problem, and nobody wanted to be the next target of the fandom's wrath. So they started enabling her just to keep the peace. And that ended up leading Huda to being the only Islander in Love Island history to be a finalist within a couple that was explicitly platonic. And I'm pretty sure production even said that Chris and Huda tried to leave the island before the results were named. And this was all so those who aligned with Huda's emotional inconsistency could feel like they too were deserving of love. But the problem was never about Huda being deserving of finding someone. It was about whether that someone would one be on the show, and if We, as a collective, needed to be subjected to the chaos in doing so. And look, I like to see the best in people. I don't like seeing someone who is clearly traumatized traumatize others. But I genuinely fear for the people who feel emboldened by Huda's behavior and those that they will encounter because this behavior is abusive. And what makes it even more dangerous is how easily this behavior is mistaken for authenticity and genuineness. We should all know that abuse starts with a need to control, and it's been displayed time and time again that Huda needs to feel in control of her partner to believe that the relationship is going well, and that's not a healthy dynamic long term. If someone is always submitting to your whims and your needs without any consideration for their own, that's not love, that's a power imbalance. And when that imbalance is left unchecked, it becomes the breeding ground for emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, and in more extreme cases, coercive control. That's the kind of dynamic we saw forming between Huda and Jeremiah, and then Huda and Chris. Both men were constantly being made to prove themselves, apologize, regulate her emotions, and bend over backwards just to keep the peace, while she rarely took actual accountability for the chaos she helped create. And I have seen a lot of people express the sentiment that her relationship with Chris was a much better or healthier dynamic for her, but that's very alarming to me on so many levels because the only reason people perceive it as working better is because he generally avoided conflict and appeased her 90% of the time. Think back to the day where each couple was tasked with caring for a baby. Chris and Huda were butting heads over simple things, and when they finally came together to resolve their issues, Huda asked him if there was anything that she needed to work on, and instead of Chris being truthful, he folded and told her to just give him a kiss. Personally, I feel like it's because he knows that she responds well to physical intimacy and he didn't want a problem. And during the only instance where he actually brought up issues towards her was when she repeatedly cut him off, even as he asked her not to. And then she got up and walked away before they reached a compromise. And then, even after that, Huda refused to actually communicate why she had the boundary about PDA that she did. She explained it to Amaya, but she couldn't admit to Chris that the real reason she refused to kiss him in public was because she wanted to present an image of moving slower to the other islanders. She wanted to continue repeating past behaviors that didn't serve her in the privacy of her bed while also being viewed as changed and grown when it came to how the rest of the house perceived her. Basically, Huda wanted to have her cake and eat it too. And while many of her defenders say that they understand her reasoning behind this, it makes no sense unless you admit that she's lying. She claims it's because the Islanders judged her for moving quickly with Jeremiah when speaking to Chris, but then she tells Amaya it's because she wants to do things right this time, and that's a contradiction. If doing things right means not moving fast, then she wouldn't be having intimacy with Chris at night. And on top of that, she would admit that the intimacy she's having is more than just kissing, but she refused to even admit that much. Even in her conversation with Chris, I kept wondering why she wouldn't just say the word sex. But then I realized that her admitting to what she was actually doing would dismantle the carefully curated image she was trying to maintain, not only to the Islanders, but to the viewers watching from home. If she said the word, she'd have to be accountable for her contradictions. And accountability isn't something Huda has ever modeled unless she was forced to. And Chris was not confrontational enough to force that. None of them are. And because no one ever calls Huda out in real time, her behavior escalates. The final episode is a perfect example of how far it's gone, how entitled she's become to always getting her way, even when it directly crosses someone else's boundaries. We literally watched her try to pressure Chris into being physically intimate by counting down from three like it was some kind of ultimatum. And when that didn't work, she switched tactics, asked him to cuddle instead, knowing he was clearly trying to sleep. And when that didn't work, she just straight up guilted him, saying, "If not cuddling me is worth me being upset tomorrow, that's the battle you're picking, so congratulations." What are we even watching at this point? That's not just manipulative, that's coercive. And it's wild how little attention that moment got considering how loaded and uncomfortable it really was. I remember watching with my mom and literally having to pause it because I was like, is she for real? Imagine if that was a man saying that to a woman. People love to say it's not that deep, but there is literally nothing shallow about coercing someone into using their body. I don't care if it's a freaking handshake, that's unacceptable behavior. So we have got to stop defending harm just because it's coming from someone who's soft spoken or relatable. You people are enabling abuse. And healing can only start when someone recognizes the pattern. But how can we help Huda recognize her patterns if you have hundreds and thousands of other unhealed minions enabling her? And believe me when I say that I could have gone way deeper into this. There are so many examples I didn't even touch, like the racism that's been spewing out of her fan base, mirroring the same silencing tactics that she uses. Or how people keep screaming that we're just jealous of Huda, as if her position is something to envy. Be serious. She wasn't desired by the men in the villa, and she's the only finalist who left single. What exactly are we supposed to be jealous of? The face that she bought? I noticed that y'all love to point out red flags in men, and you're not wrong, but that doesn't cancel out Huda's patterns. And that's because the difference is that she shows them with everyone. It's emotional manipulation with her friends, with her lovers, and with viewers. She bulldozes her way through the villa and expects softness in return, and when she doesn't get it, she falls apart or lashes out. And that's not growth, that's deflection. So please, on behalf of everyone, stop saying she's changed if you're then going to turn around and harass the very people who know her and who can hold her accountable, like Shelley and Olandria. You don't get to say that someone's growing while also pushing away the people who will keep them on that path. Holding someone accountable is and always has been an act of love. It's way more compassionate than letting them become an emotional tornado, wrecking everyone in their path unchecked. And if I'm going to lay it all out there, a person who deeply loathes themselves the way that Huda seems to cannot give you a real friendship or a healthy relationship long term. Not because they're evil or undeserving of love, but because their cup is empty. I've learned that when someone has nothing of their own to give, you'll spend all of your energy pouring into them and getting nothing in return. And you quickly realize that that's not love. That's not how love should feel. And people like Huda and the ones who defend her no matter what will have you believing that that's the best that you can get. So I say this from a place of real compassion, not just for Huda, but for the people around her, for the viewers watching, relating, maybe even justifying their own behavior based on hers. I want healing for all of us. I want us to stop making excuses for harm and start building real accountability. That is the only way that we can elect change in our lives and better the lives around us. So, if this breakdown resonated or enlightened you in any way, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts below, especially if you've experienced people like this in your own life. And above all, everyone, please take care of yourselves. love harder, but also love smarter. Until next time, bye.